Good morning. Welcome to the latest Indaba Network Webinar. We're going to give people a few minutes to join. I see attendees trickling in. It's a very chilly morning in Joburg today, so I hope you're all keeping nice and warm wherever you are tuning in from. If you'd like, please give us a shout in the chat with your name, company, and job title. Good morning, Val. I can see you. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to give it a few more seconds before we kick off. Okay, throughout our conversation today, you're really encouraged to make comments and to ask questions and to engage with our speakers. Towards the end of our webinar, we will have a live Q&A session with our panel members, and we'll try and answer as many of your questions as we possibly can. Good morning, Beulah. I also see you. Welcome. And Joel from CHRO. Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Today's topic is an extension of Women's Month, and it's absolutely crucial to the well-being of our employees, but also the well-being of our society. And although we won't be able to, I think, solve the problem within the next hour, let's really put our heads together and think how we can, why predatory behavior is still taking place in 2020, and how we can stamp it out. I would like to kick off today with a poll, and you should be able to see it in your chat now. The question is, does your company have preventative policies in place to protect employees against predatory behavior? And your option is, yes, we're protected and feel safe from different forms of predatory behavior. A second, we have some policies in place, but we don't feel sufficiently protected. And third one, our policies only support victims of predatory behavior and does nothing to prevent it. And unfortunately, our employees are not protected against predatory behavior. I can see everyone voting, and we'll give it a few seconds. And while we wait for everyone to vote, I'm joined by a powerhouse panel this morning, experts, each in their own field. And I'd like to give a warm welcome to Tantaswa Fubu, Group Executive of Human Capital at Barloworld. Her team calls her Boss Lady. Welcome, Tantaswa. I'd also like to welcome Christelle Colman. She's the MD of Elite Wealth Assets Insurance. Welcome, Christelle. Thanks for joining us. And I'd like to welcome Fiona Leppan. She's a director at Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr, and she also is fresh off the press from giving a lecture at WITS last night. So thanks for joining us and making time, ladies, in your busy schedules. Okay, let's give a few more seconds. I think most people have voted now, so I'm going to close the poll and let's see the results. Okay, we say 46% of our attendees say they are protected and feel safe from different forms of predatory behavior. I think that's quite a large number. 20% say they have policies in place, but they don't feel sufficiently protected. Another 20% say our policies only support victims of predatory behavior and does nothing to prevent it. And there's unfortunately a 13% of people who say our employees are not protected against predatory behavior. Tantaswa, maybe you can start us off. Are you surprised by the poll?
Am I surprised about the poll? I thought we would have less than 46%, yes, who say they feel protected. But even as I say that, I truly believe that it is a low percentage to have 46%. And if we were writing an exam, that's a fail, by the way, to have 46% saying they feel protected in their workspace. So there's something very wrong with our corporates. If only 46% of our women feel that, the workspaces are safe for them. And this has an implication not only on us as women being safe in the workspace, it also might talk to whether we stay in the corporate or not because we feel safe or we do not feel safe. So I am quite concerned, more than surprised with the poll. I'm also very concerned with the 13% that's outright, we are not protected at all. If anything, I think that is quite high to have 13% of our people say that they're not protected at all, and they know that they're not protected.
Yes, and that's only of this small test group. Tantaswa, you shared with me that you were horrified when you were called in to deal with a case of, I think it was sexual harassment, that had apparently already been dealt with, one in which the victim was not believed. Talk to us about what the takeaway was from that experience.
If I just backtrack a little bit, I found that it was not only that the victim or the survivor, as you like to call it, was not believed. It was also that there was active support for the perpetrator.
Oh, goodness, yeah.
And to my horror of horrors, the people who were supporting the perpetrator and not believing the victim were women, actually. So that was one thing, one of the takeaways, that sometimes as women, in cases of sexual harassment, in cases where there's patriarchy involved, we are so, I guess our minds have internalized this way of being and thought it is the right way. And therefore, we tend to believe the men before we believe the woman. So that was the first one. But the second one was, I sat back and I realized that in companies generally, and that could be why the poll came out the way it did. In companies generally, even where there is a policy on sexual harassment, one, it is not known. Two, people, when they're being inducted, there's not even a whisper about the stand of the company on being anti-sexual harassment and the likes. But most importantly, the people who are supposed to deal with cases that are brought forward are not even trained on how to deal with this. So they really do not know. And probably the last point is, people don't even know how to define sexual harassment. So it really is an issue for me.
Thanks, Tantaswa. Christelle, in your career of about 30 years, you've said this year, you've encountered a lot of bullying and sexual harassment. You shared with me a particular instance where a colleague had made a very inappropriate joke, and where your colleagues were also laughing at his joke. You also mentioned that he'd been involved in previous violent behavior. And I was wondering if you would have liked to share this instance with the audience. Did you go to HR? What happened to the perpetrator?
Okay, so obviously I don't want to pinpoint where in my career this happened. I work, the company that I run is part of the Old Mutual Group. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Old Mutual. And I just wanted to comment on the previous point you raised. We have very extensive campaigns in Old Mutual around awareness of inappropriate behavior. I can really, give that confirmation. But this specific incident, I'm quickly going to tell you what happened. I attended a senior leadership, executive leadership conference, and I always take great care in how I dress to be appropriate. I also have to mention that I'm a rape survivor. I was raped when I was 11 years old, so I'm very aware of predatory behavior. It's always been a theme in my life. And I decided to go and sit in a specific place in this meeting room because I wanted to be far away from this specific individual. And he came to sit next to me. And he sat down and he said, made a very inappropriate comment in front of the group of people that's part of my leadership team. And everyone laughed. And I felt utterly embarrassed, even though I'm almost 50 years old and I think that my life is not, I'm supposed to not be subjected to these sort of things anymore. And then he went on to repeat this comment at lunch, the same joke. And I'm firmly of the opinion that it was done in order to sort of put me in my place. These guys don't just do it for the fun of it. It's also, a kind of a bullying tactic, if they, with the games that they play. And I was very offended by it. I wanted to go to HR. I wanted to raise this issue, but unfortunately, it's a very powerful individual at that time in our organization who got incredible results for the business, and who've had a number of incidents, whether it was bullying tactics or aggressive behavior or totally inappropriate comments. And I just shied away from doing it. Still to this day, talking about it and feeling the effect of it. And I kept on thinking, if I am not prepared to go and raise an issue like this, how would someone react or handle it that's lower down on the hierarchy? And it's possibly why people don't come forward. And it is, as we said right at the start, one of the main reasons why women leave organizations, because I would rather leave than face that situation, because it's very unpleasant. So a very important topic that you're tackling here today, and I look forward to hearing from the experts on the panel.
Yeah, thanks, Christelle. And Fiona, maybe we can rope in your expertise here. To which extent are organizations responsible for protecting their employees against different types of predatory behavior?
It's an important question, and our law is multifaceted. First of all, we have the common law, which certainly promotes a duty of care that the employer owes towards the employee. But we have statutory protections as well, both under the Occupational Health and Safety Act and under the Employment Equity Act. And what these pieces of legislation are telling us is that employers are going to pick up liability if they don't manage this situation properly. And the consequences of that can be extremely severe. But what it does require is that when conduct, certainly this is the case under the employment equity legislation, is that once this type of behavior manifests, it's got to be brought to the attention of the employer, not necessarily by the victim, but through the important role of resources and human capital. The employer needs to be made aware of this so that it can take steps. Because the Employment Equity Act makes it very plain that if the employer does not show that it's taken all reasonable steps in this situation, even to prevent this type of conduct, it's going to find that it's on the wrong side of liability. And that's just as an overview, as a starting point.
Yeah. Tantaswa, if you could maybe just put on your camera again. When you and I spoke about employee wellness and about preventing predatory behavior in the workplace, you've mentioned that it boils down to two things for you. The first being the culture of the company, and then secondly, the trustworthiness of leadership. So while we wait for Tantaswa to come on camera, I'd like to run another poll, and you should be able to see it in your chat now. Now, I wanted to find out, do you trust your company's leadership? And your options are unequivocally yes. I trust leadership, but won't approach them with something as sensitive as predatory behavior. And the third option, leadership is a part of the problem. So we'll give everyone a chance to quickly vote while Tantaswa comes back on camera. Tantaswa, can you hear us? I think we might have a little bit of a technical issue. So
hello, Judith.
Oh, can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear you. It's just that I think my they say my connection is low, so they've taken away my audio. Sorry, my visual mode. So it will come back when it sorts itself out. Yes.
There's no problem. I do have a question for you though. What role do you think does leadership and culture play in the fight against predatory behavior?
Judith, it really is the most important thing, the leadership and the culture of the organization, because if we're going to have employees feeling safe, if we're going to increase that 46% of people saying they're feeling safe to at least a 90%, where I guess it really should be, we need to have people feeling that from their leadership, from the top of the organization, you know, they are protected. The leadership needs to talk the talk, but not only talk the talk, but to walk the talk and to earn the trust of the employees. And how do we earn the trust of the employees? By ensuring that when someone comes and reports, you know, an incident like sexual harassment, firstly, we do not vilify the person. We do not create stigmas that shouldn't be there, but also that we take the process as it should, and we give support to the person. However, for me, Judith, I think that's really coming in at the end. I think we need to create ways of ensuring that people are not subjected to sexual harassment at work. And that takes the leadership of an organization to set that tone, to set that culture, and to deal decisively with issues and you know, when people incidences of sexual harassment. And you know, there's this issue, especially, I think, Christelle, you talked about how senior the person was, who you were the story you were relating, the incident you were relating, and how much of a rainmaker that person was. There's this issue around corporates generally, when someone is bringing in the money, that they seem to be walking on water, and that they can trample on anyone else and the organizations will turn a blind eye. That time has come and gone, Judith. We cannot afford as leaders to say just because someone is bringing the money today, then they can, you know, trample on anyone else. That is very short-sighted in its outlook. As leaders, we need to be there for our people and ensure that the environment is conducive for everyone to flourish. Otherwise, we are not, again, I repeat, we are not going to have women staying in organizations, and organizations are going to be their losers. The women are the losers, of course. The organizations are going to be the losers, but our country is going to lose because women bring something extra, something special to any space that they're in. So we cannot afford to have spaces where women are not comfortable to be at.
I think that's crucial, and it's something that Christelle and I also spoke about. Predatory, and for the lack of a better term, characters are usually high-performing employees. And Christelle just also outlined that the colleague that she had an issue with was a high-performing employee, and that made it all the more difficult to take steps against them. Fiona, so how are victims of predatory behavior protected by law? And more importantly, not more importantly, but also an important point, are their jobs protected?
Their jobs are protected because should they come forward with information, either themselves or, as I said, through a representative or through HR, that they've been the subject of potential issues with regard to harassment and other types of predatory behavior, they have rights under our legislation not to be victimized. Where they give confidential information, that information must be kept confidential. And if there's a person in the organization that was to release that information, it's considered a criminal offense under the Employment Equity Act. And victims are protected in terms of not being subject to any occupational detriment. And so because they come forward with a complaint, the person against whom they may be lodging that complaint certainly can't take the stance that I'm going to find fault with this person with a view to driving them out of the business through disciplinary measures or the like, because that occupational detriment will not be tolerated by our courts. And just generally in terms of victim remedies, our Labour Court has become extremely strident in this field in certainly exercising its powers under the Employment Equity Act, because it can lead to compensation claims, it can lead to punitive damages. So over and above the compensation, the punitive damages can be awarded as well. And what I like from what Tantaswa has mentioned is it's very important these strategies are driven from the top. because for me, that's where it really makes its impact. Because for the employer, it needs to make sure that it can eradicate this type of conduct from the workplace. And a failure on its part to do so is going to lead it into difficulties, as I said earlier. And in one High Court decision, the judge placed great emphasis on one of those preventative measures being ongoing training in your business to highlight what is this type of conduct that won't be tolerated, but more importantly, what are the consequences of this? Because the individual employee who is the harasser, for example, can be sued for damages in his own right, and he can pick up that liability. There's nothing to stop the employer saying, I've warned you not to do this, I'm taking disciplinary steps, you caused me a loss, I'll sue you for the recompense, because this has got to be stopped where it does take place. And unfortunately, there are examples throughout our case law of women that have really suffered tremendous difficulties with post-traumatic stress disorder as a consequence of this type of conduct.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of trusting our leadership, 51% of you voted unequivocally yes. 27% said that they do trust leadership but won't approach them with something as sensitive as predatory behavior. And then a shocking, I think, 20% said leadership is a part of the problem. Tantaswa, what do you think about this, the results of this poll?
Hi, Judith, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Thanks. You know, it is shocking, it is sad, it is disappointing, and as part of corporate leadership in South Africa, generally, I am hanging my head in shame at this. And it's not that I was not expecting that it would be like that. I think people are still kind when they say it's only 20% of the leaders that are perpetrating this, because there's a lot of bullying in corporate South Africa, Fiona, and I'm talking generally corporate South Africa. There's a lot of bullying, and it's either perpetrated by us as leaders or it is enabled by us as leaders. And some of it, it manifests in sexual harassment. I truly believe that it is time, we should have done this a long time ago, but it is time that as corporate leaders, we sign up and we commit to cleaning our names, our collective name. We sign up to ensuring that our spaces the environments are great for women. But also in doing that, we need to be able to showcase how we are treating or dealing with perpetrators. Because talk is cheap. If we just want to say, this is what we believe, this is what we stand against, and people are still, being subjected to sexual harassment incidences, no matter how, you can view it, we are not going to be winning. The trust deficit will always be there, So we really need to take this by the neck. We always have targets. We have targets for diversity. We have targets for revenue. We have targets for that. And we are just so quiet about this. That is at the core of our people. And all the organizations, you'll hear that they'll say the most important asset we have is our people. And yet, what we do to the people doesn't talk to that. So it is high time that, honestly, we walk the walk as organizational leaders. And we really do take to task, and we don't only take people through disciplinary hearings in our organization, but we support the women when they want to take their cases up in law and ensure that they are ready and they are supported when they do that. Otherwise, we're going to be fighting a losing battle.
Yeah, absolutely. Christelle, I saw you give a big yes when Tantaswa started speaking. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yes, I think it's important for us to remember that this the predatory behavior as well as the aggressive behavior from men towards women is not unique to South Africa. I wanted to raise that point because sometimes we think that because of gender-based violence, being such a major problem in South Africa that we might be worse off than the rest of the world. And also in my previous life, I was the CEO of a big European business in South Africa, a European-owned business. I was the only female CEO out of 35 countries. So whenever I attended meetings in Europe, which was basically monthly, I would be surrounded by European men. And let me tell you, they have a much bigger problem. You know, the patriarchy that still exhibits in sort of the big sort of well-known European countries is incredible. And so we have to also acknowledge that in South Africa, because of our constitution and the focus on equality, not just from a gender, but also from a racial perspective, we have a lot more of awareness and a conversation that happens around it. So I just wanted to raise a positive point as well. But again, in that example, I was called to Europe to present a strategy, and there was a bully, you know, on Exco, on this global organization that really made it his business to make life difficult for me. I had a very bad interaction with him, and I literally flew back to South Africa and I resigned the next morning. And I think that's the loss that we talk about. We talk, you know, that Tantaswa was also mentioning, is that women tend to step away, and we lose often step away permanently because the pressure is so difficult to manage. So it is, and the absolute best interest of the organizations to make sure that the cultures are changed, that the resources and the processes are in place to raise these issues, and that there is a genuine sense of comfort given to women that if they do raise issues, it can be done perhaps in a way that they won't be affected, because I think it's the repercussions that come with raising the issue that do prevent women from speaking up and changing. And when Judith, when we had our interaction before we started this panel discussion, I said to you, it would be so great if we could hear of successful examples where women actually did take the hard road and where they came up with, you know, a successful outcome. Because I think when you start hearing about, you know, success stories, you start getting courage, you know, the courage to actually address these issues. I, for one, did not know that there are real legal, you know, consequences for these individuals. And I'm going to rethink some of the decisions that I've made just after today's discussion.
Thanks, Christelle. Fiona, maybe you could share a case study with us, whether it was recent or in the past, where someone did get the necessary justice.
Absolutely. There is a very important decision. One, I think, that's a blight on South Africa, because it was a case that was explored extensively in Canada as a case study. But this was a lady who was sexually harassed over a repeated period of time at a financial services institution, and found it difficult to bring these incidents to the attention of her employer. And when she did, going further up the line to senior management to lodge her concerns, she actually felt she had to mask the discussion behind one that would talk to her particular financial plight and family responsibility and the possibility of an increase in pay, as a foil for her actually coming forward and saying, but my real issue is that I'm being sexually harassed by my immediate manager. And in cross-examination in this trial in the Labour Court, she was dealt with rather firmly by the employer's counsel, who suggested that this is really contrived. Your issue was a demand for an increase. You use the issue of this harassment to try and get what you're actually looking for, and missed the point that she needed to have the discussion about a work-related issue under the guise of a different topic, to muster the courage to bring it to her employer's attention. Both in the Labour Court and in the Labour Appeal Court, the employer received short shrift, both in how it had managed the situation, and more importantly, that this lady had indeed been harassed, and her version of the events was extremely credible. She was awarded significant compensation as a consequence, but it took an awful lot of time and energy and stress for her to go through this tortuous process that lasted obviously more than 2 years. What's important more recently is in this last month, in Women's Month, our Minister of Employment and Labour has issued a draft code of good practice on the prevention and elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work. It's a draft open to public comment by the 20th of October, but one of the issues that it is certainly playing on is the preventative measures, and most importantly, allowing the victim to come forward not with the concern, how do I approach my employer on this, but to have the right support programs available for the employee so they're comfortable and they get a sense of confidence in being able to come up and explain what's happening to them. That's critical. That's why the training on preventative measures, what constitutes these examples of harassment we've been talking about, what are the consequences from a criminal angle? We mustn't forget assault, which is a criminal offence likewise, and certain provisions of the Employment Equity Act making this criminal misconduct. Because that's how you're going to stop this, is when people understand this is not to be trifled with, this is a serious issue. And it fits, obviously, with society's greater aim at stamping out gender-based violence. Thank you.
Busisiwe is commenting in the chat section. She says she thinks that the long and daunting process is what deters women from reporting issues. And that's why they would rather maybe walk away. She asked the question, and although we have a Q&A at the end, I'm thinking that maybe we should address this now. Is there a prioritization with courts on matters such as these?
I think it has to come. I think it's necessary. Obviously, one in certain circumstances can approach the Judge President for an accelerated date for hearing in a deserving matter. It's not something that's done frequently, and it mustn't be seen as an abuse because there are other deserving cases that require the court's time, and one would appreciate that. But these are very sensitive issues, and I agree that that acceleration needs to be given credit. And I think that's actually something that needs to be addressed both through our judiciary and through our Department of Employment and Labour as a talking in order to get that.
Absolutely. Thanks for that question, Busisiwe. Tantaswa, maybe you could share a few of the, when we discussed the webinar beforehand, you mentioned a few very practical ideas that could be implemented immediately to deal with sexual harassment, but also to support victims. If you'd like to share those ideas with the audience, I'd be grateful.
Thank you, Judith. As I've said, I think for me, we need to try and minimize the people who are sexually harassed at work, if not eradicate that completely. And that's why I propagate that we come in right at the beginning, then come in when people have been sexually harassed and we have to deal with that. So my thinking is, as companies, there is quite a lot of capabilities that we have, and we won't have to go and reinvest actually. We just need to think creatively. For instance, and I was giving you this example. We have a student accommodation center where we train our students when they come to the workshops and get trained. There is already a building where we house them in. We could just take 2-3 of those flats and demarcate them for use in terms of this program and this process. And what we do, we make it known to the company, and I think companies, quite a lot of companies can do this, make it known that should you be, let's say you are at home and there is domestic abuse happening at home and you do not know where to go, you should know that there is somewhere safe, that I don't have to have money because to go to a hotel, but my employer provides a safe accommodation for me to go there at any point in time that I feel unsafe where I'm at. Secondly, we have cars, we chauffeur people around, we hire cars. So if I do not have a car, if I'm in a space where I cannot get into a car, and if I'm in a space where it's late and I cannot get into a taxi because it's dangerous for me, especially as a woman, that I can press dial, and then, we get the company car coming to pick me up. And I know Judith is going to say, this is expensive, but at what cost? What is the cost of a human life? For me, those things, I'm an accountant, yes, by profession, but there is no cost to human life. So if we do that, for instance, and then you find that a whole lot of us as organizations, we have a whole lot of clinical psychologists that we employ. Why don't we divert a portion of those and dedicate them to be dealing with issues around sexual harassment and domestic abuse, such that if that happens to this person and she has to go to this accommodation, she knows there's this number that I can call 24/7, and there will be a clinical psychologist on the other side of the line to be able to take me through. We employ a number of legal minds, and after I've spoken to this clinical psychologist, I know that there's a legal person who's gonna walk me through, such that also if I want to take this up with the courts in the the criminal space, I have someone who's guiding me. And I, as a woman, as a South African citizen, but also as someone who is employed by this company, who is valued by this company, am able to feel secured and protected and supported. And I don't really have to have money to pay for this that can be provided. So we really need to start thinking differently about the solutions that we bring forward, specifically where, in my mind, we do not have to invest, new money into doing something. We just have to rearrange how we use the resources that we have. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I see Fiona nodding. Fiona, would you like to comment on that?
It's an excellent comment. Having those support structures in place is critical. And something else I wanted to raise, because it's not something many people think about. There is legislation, the Prevention Against Harassment Act. I think it's a very good piece of legislation in that it's possible to get protection orders through the magistrates court, which is of course a much quicker process as well, and can bring about immediate relief because it's in the form of an interdict to stop a natural person. It doesn't obviously have an impact in relation to the company as a juristic person, but to stop a person from harassing, from intimidating and committing assault, if you like, in this manner. So it's another added layer of protection that our law does provide. But again, only if persons know about it. And that talks very, very nicely to what Tantaswa has been advocating throughout this talk today, is we've got to make sure people understand their rights, what steps can be taken, and what are the appropriate steps to take in situations such as these.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on, I'd like to run the last poll. So please vote in the chat. Have you experienced predatory behavior in your workplace? So although we might have HR professionals that are tuning in, they can also be subject to predatory behavior. Please vote now, and we will continue our discussion. A question that was shared on the survey before the webinar was, what can HR do to protect an employee when the perpetrator is someone in a position of power, someone in an executive or leadership role? And I think we've touched on that a bit. But Tantaswa, would you like to start us off maybe answering that question? And Fiona, are there any extra legal measures that organizations should take to protect or support junior staffers?
I think it goes back. I think it was Fiona who said up front that organizations firstly must understand that they could be held liable for what their executives do or senior people do to junior people. So if we take that and we internalize that, then we can really understand the seriousness of this as employers and as organizations, and understand that we cannot just sweep things under the carpet. We've done that for a long time because, as we said, people decided to leave the organizations, people decided to find other ways of coping. But with the awareness, and it should be, we should be there, people are going to start holding us as organization and the perpetrators accountable. And that should happen. So we need to ensure that as organization, if someone is senior up, people know that, let's say, there is a dedicated person who they can go to. Either there's a whistleblowing a line, and I know a lot of people generally feel that with whistleblowing, executives can, do and find out who did the whistleblowing. And fortunately, Judith, from my side, and not at Barloworld, having the whistleblowing line, it works. We do not go and check who said what. We investigate, especially if the whistleblowing is with regards to a senior person, a senior manager, an executive, because you have to do what's right. So organizations have to do what's right. So it's either whistleblowing or a specific individual that's trusted. It could be someone that's outside of the organization. It could be a clinical psychologist that you have designated to deal with such sensitive matters because they know how to deal with them. So firstly, people need to know that there's someone that they can speak to if this thing happens, if there's any sexual harassment incident. Secondly, when people have spoken up, how you treat the person who has spoken up. So if I'm made to feel like a villain because I have spoken up, I am not gonna have the guts to carry on and see the case to fruition. But also I'm gonna share that with others, sometimes with my friends, and people are not gonna want to speak up. So how you make the person feel as and during the process is quite important. How you hold their hand through the process, and how they do not, there's this thing with sexual harassment. How do you prove it? There are no receipts for sexual harassment. No one is going to harass you and then write you out a receipt and say, on this day I harassed you and therefore this is the proof. And we need to keep that in mind, that there are no receipts for sexual harassment and rape. And therefore, we need to be very careful and very sensitive on how we deal with that, and how we gather the information, and how we help people put their case across. Because there's also the need to be very clear and to be pointed about what has happened. The incident, be able to describe it. And we need to be able to help our people describe that incident, So how do we do that then as an organization? Thirdly, when someone has been found to have been guilty, therefore, after everything, what is it that we do as an organization? Do we deal with the person? Or, as in Christelle's point, because the person is the one who brings in money, or most money to the organization, we decide, our HEPS and our return on equity is not going to do well if we let go of this person. We need to deal decisively with people who are sexual predators at work, and ensure that as we deal decisively with them, and as we start talking about, how we deal with people who are sexual predators and have case studies to back that up. One, we have people who believing that we do something about this. Two, we have would-be sexual predators who thinking twice now and thinking, maybe this is not the space for me to do my, this cruelty that I'm doing to people. Thirdly, you have anyone then who has been sexually harassed or who would be sexually harassed in the future having the guts and the courage to come up and say, this is what has happened to me, because they have seen how you as an organization, you're dealing with these things. But if we do not have the track record, we cannot build that trust with our people to say, actually, we will stand with you, we will walk with you, we will investigate fully, we will ensure that the person who's found guilty is dealt with. We will ensure that if you want to go the legal route, we'll help you and point you, the right way. If we don't do that, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that fantastic comment. So the poll has ended and we asked, have you experienced predatory behavior? 15% said yes, 23% said not me, but I know of a colleague, and 60% said no. So I think it's an encouraging 60%, but we obviously want that at 100%. Christelle, having dealt with predatory behavior in the workplace, do you have advice for the 15% that said yes?
Just to add to what the other columnists are saying, I think it's something else that can be done by organizations is to put the responsibility on the rest of the leadership team as well, to call out their colleagues.
Absolutely.
I really believe that in some of the examples that I've mentioned, that people stand by and keep quiet and they don't call out behavior. Other men need to step up. And women need to step up and not be intimidated, or because they're not the victim. So it's easier to actually assist and support. So all of us need to reach out and work together to resolve this. What is a real problem in the workplace. And I think more conversations like this is important. It shouldn't just be limited to Women's Month. It's been extremely insightful to hear the case study from Fiona. And we need to read about that, write about it. It needs to be part of the HR strategy and approach. And I can't say enough how I like Tantaswa's suggestion about a whistleblower line for harassment. For me, the issue is not just about predatory behavior, but it is also about male aggression towards women in the workplace, where women step back and shy away. Because that's almost a topic that we don't often talk about. Women don't respond to that kind of aggressive behavior, management style. It does elevate the boys' club even to a further, and also to address issues around swearing in meetings, aggressive behavior, because women feel very intimidated and then tend to step back. And the last point I wanted to make was this whole comment around the workplace was created by men for men in the 50s. The workplace needs to change in its entirety, and this way that we treat women, the way that we handle our meetings, the way that we engage with each other, there's a very different approach when it comes to women. You can't say, put on your big old panties and you just have to be part of this. Men need to change their behavior in order to make it more equitable environment for women to operate and thrive in and stay with their work, with their workplaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can move on now to a few questions from the audience, if my panelists are comfortable with that. We had a question from, let me just pull it up here. From Alma Moses, and she says, where you are HR and you're aware of predatory behavior, but the victim does not want it raised, how do you as HR broach the subject? Tantaswa, maybe you can take that one.
That kills my heart, to be honest, Judith, firstly, because there are those instances. And I do understand why someone would not want to, to take it up, but they trust you enough to come and tell you that this is what is happening. So in my experience, what I have done firstly is to really work with the individual and really find out that they don't have any, because you need to fight. This is about a fight. They don't have any fighting spirit, any fighting edge that's there, because if it's not there, they're not going to do anything. So So you first establish that is it because you thought you would fight alone? If I fight with you, can we fight this together? So that's the first thing that I normally would do. The second thing, if I realize that we really cannot fight this together because they do not want to, to go through the fight, is to get the person to be helped in whatever way that they can be helped. It could be through the counseling, it could be through, the many programs that you have at work to ensure that they're being dealt with, but also to ensure that the sexual harassment, the incident does not negatively impact on their performance, because it is quite often that someone who's been performing, once this happens, then even their performance at work starts dwindling. And we need to come in as employers and understand that. And if you have been given information that is confidential as HR, you need to be able to navigate that space for that person with that person's line manager. I have in the past, Judith, even when engaging with the line managers, and the line managers they're obstinate and they do not want the person to have a bonus because they're saying the person was not performing for some part of the year and whatever. Where I know that this has been happening, I actually do change, the things and ensure that the person does have the bonus, because it's a double jeopardy. You can't be sexually harassed and then you lose out on your bonus. It's like everything is just stacked up against you for no fault of your own. So we need to be humane as HR and deal with people on a humane basis. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, and this is me personally, and I don't think it's an HR issue specifically. If this would be someone at an executive level, I find that I own people's fights and people's struggles, and probably something that I need to be counseled on myself. I will start checking, the steps of the person, and almost saying, I'm actually watching you, because you cannot have those things happening around you. And I think, I can't remember who it was who said, we need to be calling out, other executives. It's just hard to call out when you're not going to have a backing, because someone can say there's a defamation of character, but someone needs to know that they are on a tightrope. You need to find a way to make them know that they are on a tightrope. And as I'm saying, that's not an HR issue, but that's just me, because I just feel that you cannot not have justice for people.
Yeah. Thank you, Tantaswa. Maybe a question for you, Christelle, because you touched on the fact that corporate needs to change, the workplace needs to change. And this question is from Brevin, asking, what is the strategic opportunity to influence the corporate culture at all levels of the business?
Opportunity, obviously, there are a multitude of internationally recognized and local research documents that point towards the company's performance improves when there's equity and in the work, when there's equal opportunity in the workplace for men and women. The next conversation here is one of the main reasons why women step back from opportunities is one of the reasons is perhaps this pressure from a gender aggression perspective. We need to get women in senior roles in the industry. We need to get women to lead. Why do women step back so often? We have a major problem with gender equality in the workplace. We've got the pay gap issue that's still prevalent all around corporate South Africa. So in order to attract more women to the workplace, in order to entice women to stay and not step out of corporate, not step out of business, you need to change the way the workplace is structured, so that we have, equity in gender. And as a result, I believe we will get better, company results, operational results, better success stories. And the world is still unfortunately run by women. I mean, up until Maria Ramos's resignation, she was the only female CEO of the top 40 listed companies on the JSE. Why is that? Perhaps this aspect is one of the main reasons why women tend to step away. They find it uncomfortable. They don't enjoy the workplace. They find they don't get the opportunities. So, it's a very, very big question to ask, but I think it does touch. This is part of the problem.
Yeah. Thank you, Christelle. Fiona, maybe you could answer this question. It starts with a statement, and Esa Suleiman says, I think it's also important to recognize sexual harassment faced by the LGBT community, as there's usually additional stigma attached. Would you advise to handle harassment between same-sex individuals differently?
I think it goes to sensitivity rather than a need to adjust policy, because policy considerations ought to be able to cope with this type of issue as well. The draft code I spoke to just now recognizes the rights of same-sex persons and who can be impacted equally through bullying and sexual harassment, etc. I think we just need to be sensitive as to how we manage these things within the framework of the law, which expects us to do just that. I would like to add one aspect, if I may, to what Christelle has mentioned too, and Tantaswa. Very often, a victim doesn't want to come forward other than to say, this has happened to me, but I want no further part in any disciplinary process. I don't want to face my aggressor. We must become creative as to how we deal with that. And I had such a situation where this lady, highly religious person, was very badly treated by a very senior executive. And the company took the formal disciplinary process seriously. And I interviewed this lady. I took extensive notes. She didn't want to submit an affidavit, but I submitted the evidence on her behalf at the particular disciplinary process that was followed before an independent chairperson. And you might say, but how did you manage that? It's because all I needed was for those events to be put to the aggressor to say, what's your version of the events here? And it was graphic, it was detailed, and it's quite obvious that a vivid imagination would have had to have been had if this lady was making up these facts. Quite clearly, she did not. The disciplinary chairperson gave an outstanding award, explained why the company was doing the right thing in taking these steps, why it was necessary to eradicate this sort of nonsense, which had happened on a corporate event in a set of social circumstances. And it was a shockwave through that organization, but it was one that was absolutely necessary because it's not going to happen again. That was a lesson well learned. But there are other ways of managing victims' concern. They don't have to testify. They could even give their evidence by way of a statement. It's not impossible to do that because the Labour Relations Act doesn't expect us to run high court trials back there at the workplace. That's not what it envisages. You have a set of complaints, you put them to the offending employee and ask him, explain yourself, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We've unfortunately run out of time, and I think we've just touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of this topic. This topic will definitely be picked up at a later stage again until it's eradicated, I'm sure. I'd like to invite you to our webinars next week. We have a webinar on labour relations and your remote workforce. And then we also have a webinar on return to the workplace after COVID-19. Please do visit chro.co.za/events to register for these events. Really like to thank my panel, Fiona, Christelle, Tantaswa. Thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate your expertise. Goodbye.
Thanks, Judith. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.